There comes a time when you're going to have to ace an interview or two to break into the industry. Now, whether you're interviewing for your first job straight out of university or college, or your second or third job, today I'm going to talk you through my 4-page plan that I use to prepare for any interview. Hey everyone, my name is Junaid. I'm a graduate data analyst working for a financial services firm in central London. Now, the best time to apply for a job is when you don't need it, so I've been applying and interviewing consistently throughout my time as I've been working, and as a graduate and someone who's been through countless interviews, I've sort of learnt that the key to success and confidence in interviews is to know yourself very, very well and be able to sell yourself very, very well. And I've come up with a 4-page plan split up into sections to tackle each different aspect of every interview. Now, an interview as a whole can be quite a daunting experience, so I found the best way for me to deal with it is to break it down into each separate section. Break the interview down into smaller, more manageable chunks. And with my plan, each page is dedicated to covering each specific section or smaller chunk that I've broken down an interview into. So without any further ado, let's get straight into it. Pages number 1 and 2. The first 2 pages of my interview plan I dedicate to entirely generic interview questions. Now, these aren't particularly finance or data related, although after so many interviews I do tweak them to sort of be more specific, cover more finance and data related things, but overall these can range anywhere from tell me a bit about yourself. What are some of your strengths and weaknesses? Tell me about a time you overcame a challenge. What do you do in your spare time? Tell me about a personal achievement. What's something you've failed at? Now, obviously over time, as I attend more and more interviews and the job roles become more specific, I've tweaked these to slightly, in particular, I've tweaked my answers to sort of hit more finance and data related points. But in general, these 2 pages cover the most generic interview questions. Now, it's more than likely that these that I just listed, or a variation of the ones I just listed, will come up in every single interview you attend. So I'll have pre-written almost default answers to most of these questions and learnt them so that I can recite them from memory. Now, I'm not reading my answers out loud, or reciting them from memory. I'll work them into the interview, into my answers appropriately. But this way I found I don't have to worry so much about the content of my answers as much, because I've done all the worrying beforehand, and I can focus more on the interview itself, being more concise and make it into a conversation. Page number 3. Now, this is the page that ends up changing the most, because this page is dedicated to company specific questions and commercial awareness. So this page not only changes to reflect each different company, but there's also an aspect of relevancy and time change, which I'll update depending on what's happening in the news or the markets at the time. So what I'll have done is once I've received the interview confirmation, I'll go to the company's website, read up on all the projects they're working on, any news they're in. They could have been affected by a new accounting standard or actuarial regulation change, a financial sanction, and I'll read up on how they could have been affected. I'll never forget this. Last year, we were going to Pakistan and I had an interview booked on the morning of our flight. Now, during that interview, I remember I'd read up on a report that the firm I was interviewing for, a report they published. It included a set number of financial ratios for their investors. I think 7 months back, there'd been a news report which criticized the financial ratios they provided, the report structure, the way the structure was presented to investors and stakeholders, and that I remember a spokesperson for the firm had said they were overhauling their entire report structure and everything. I remember mentioning that in the interview, and we had a good 10-15 minute discussion about data streams, manipulating data, combining different data streams, calculating different ratios from different sets of data in that report. We also spoke about how they had a data person who was looking to automate bits of that report as part of all of this overhauling procedure. That was an interesting day because right as I was interviewing, it was right here. My laptop was here, my webcam was here. Right as I was interviewing, the taxi came outside to pick us up, to take us to the airport. Out of earshot, I could hear downstairs everyone was taking the luggage into the taxi. As soon as that interview ended, I had to throw off my suit, run downstairs into the taxi, off to the airport to catch our flight in time, which we did. Now, I ended up getting that job. I received an email confirmation confirming I got the job, but for the onboarding call, which was the following day, we had a stopover in Qatar and I missed that call. So that was a missed opportunity to some degree, but back to page number 3. So this page is tailored to each individual job spec. It's also the page where I'll include any information or tips from the people I've reached out to who work for the firm. So before any interview, I'll usually reach out to analysts, managers, members of the team or division I'm applying to or interviewing for, and I'll ask them a set number of questions just to get a gauge of what sort of tools they use, what sort of software they use, what sort of projects they've been working on, the team structure, how the hierarchy works. And one question I'll definitely ask them is what helped them to stand out in their interview and what's something I could emulate to put my best foot forward. I remember for one interview preparation session that I had asked a data analyst who worked at the firm I was applying to a couple of questions, and he gave me such a key piece of advice for that particular firm, for that particular team. He said, make sure you're curious about data, or that you can demonstrate curiosity about data. And I remembered his advice in the interview, and I managed to wind curiosity or data curiosity into one of my answers. And usually in interviews, it's hard to tell how they're going. Interviewers usually tend to have a poker face, but once I'd given that answer and mentioned curiosity, and I remember the manager interviewing me saying that's really good. And the final page number 4, and the final page I prepare for before attending any interview is dedicated to technical questions. This is particularly important for tech professionals or data professionals or people working in finance. Now, of course, I'll have the most common technical questions ready to answer. I think it would be quite foolish for me to go into an interview not being prepared to answer questions about Excel. The distinction here is that, more importantly, I'll have scanned the job description and again asked analysts at the firm and done background research about the tools they use, the software they use, the workflows that they have in place. Now, background research can come from their website. It could be from a LinkedIn post where they mentioned a training session that they attended. It could be in the news where they've adopted a new system, a new software. By doing this, you're not only demonstrating commercial awareness, but also showing a market interest in the firm's specific work and day-to-day job. I was sitting on the flip side of the coin, helping to hire someone in our team, a data analyst, a junior data analyst in our team. And I remember they'd read up on a piece of software that we've been creating, a data toolkit that we've been creating for the past couple of months. If you've seen any of my day in the life videos, you'll have seen me working on that piece of software. I remember them mentioning that they'd seen we'd received funding and approval to go ahead with the further development of that software. We were working with software engineers and software developers, and we were running that entire project. And having someone who had done that level of research into the position they were applying for instantly put them at the top of our callback list. The initial interview is online on Teams, and during that interview, once they'd given that answer, my manager, who was in that interview as well, messaged me saying, hang on to the call 2 minutes after. And once the candidate had left the interview room, we spoke about how we were really impressed with the level of research and dedication they had to the interview preparation. As a data analyst, there can be a lot of your job which has to do with research. If you're working in finance, especially reading reports, reading annual reports, you're essentially researching numbers, researching parameters. And so that candidate, having done that background research, showed us that they were capable of understanding our workflow. I'd always try my best to reach out to analysts and ask them what type of tools they use in their day-to-day, what type of software they use in their day-to-day. Of course, they won't be able to provide you with any commercially sensitive information, but you'll be able to piece together a real good outline about the processes, the workflows, the tools and the softwares that they use. And then you can do background research, you can tailor your answers in the interview to hit all of those points. Now, this has proven absolutely invaluable for me in any of the interviews I've attended. In the interview for the role I'm currently in, I was asked, one of the first questions I was asked is, what's my favorite Excel function and why? I think it was a generic question to ease me into the interview. Not a question that gets asked a lot, but at the time I think I said VLOOKUP, which is quite possibly the most basic function I could have chosen. I think I said it helps to find a particular value or parameter from large sets of data, and being able to hone in on something is really cool. I think I'm paraphrasing, but that's more along the lines of what I said. That was over 2 years ago. I was fresh out of university and I probably sounded like I had no idea what I was talking about, so give me a break. Following on from that, I'll also make sure I brush up on any Excel functions, the main Excel functions that are used for data analytics. Now, obviously, a lot of that is done through my day job as a data analyst, but there are also functions that I don't use a lot on a daily basis that are used in other aspects of data analysis. So I'll just do my best to cover and refresh myself on all of the functions. XLOOKUP, concat, concatenate, etc. How they're used, their benefits, their limitations, alternatives to those functions. Another key thing which came up in one interview is how would you list 2 ways you would find duplicates in a set of data. Obviously, there's a function you can use to highlight duplicates, and then also via a pivot table. And then also, dependent on the role, I'll make sure I know my financial ratios, how they're calculated, what they show to investors, their relevance to investors and stakeholders, and how they're useful. I started doing this, making sure I brush up on my financial ratios after an interview I had, which left me completely speechless regarding one of the financial ratios I'd mentioned on my CV. Complete oversight on my behalf. The interviewer asked me how I would calculate that particular ratio from a set of values and how an investor might use that to inform a decision for XYZ. I was completely blank for about 10 seconds and I had to blag about how I'd have to review it. Probably the worst ever interview I've ever been in. Didn't get offered the role and was probably one of the only times I was uncomfortable in an interview because I didn't have my knowledge or research or sufficient preparation to back me up. Now, of course, that specific example about financial ratios only applies if the role requires it. The same applies to things like, I'll use the example of Power BI. The same applies to things like loading data into Power BI, transforming data in Power BI. Knowing the process, understanding its relevance, understanding why you would do it, understanding how you would add a slicer into a dashboard, just small things like that. You need to be comfortable explaining those processes. Interviewing the interviewer. I've sat in so many hiring interviews. I've been on both sides of the coin. And something that helped me enormously when I was applying for jobs, when I'm applying for jobs and going through the interview process, was to get the interviewer to talk more than me. If you can get the interviewer to talk more than yourself during an interview, which might sound counterintuitive, it's highly likely that you'll get a job offer or at least a call back, because people inherently love talking about themselves, the work they do, the firm they work for, and it's entirely possible they could come out of that interview thinking, wow, what a great person to talk to. I want them on my team. I want to work with them. It's one of the strongest pieces of advice I've received regarding interviews, and it works. Now, of course, the interviewer's job is to ask you questions and ascertain whether you're a good fit for the role, but I found that everyone has something that'll break them out of interviewer mode and into a more personable conversationalist mode. I tend not to get nervous anymore, and I found that if you can break the barrier, whether it's via humor, whether it's via a common shared interest, then interviews tend to flow far smoother and they almost turn into a conversation, less like a formal interview and more into a conversation. You want to actively make it less of a formal interview and reframe it into a conversation. And so that's my 4-page breakdown for how I prepare for interviews. Pages 1 and 2 for generic questions, page 3 for commercial and industry specific questions, and page 4 for technical and job specific questions. Now, obviously, as you can probably tell, there can be quite a lot of overlap between the pages, especially between pages 3 and 4, which is absolutely fine. The framework only serves as a loose outline, not a rigid structure that you have to follow to a T. Also, an important thing to note before I sign off is that I don't sit in interviews and read answers that I've written to these questions. We had an applicant from India who had a degree, experience working as a data administrator, and experience with SQL and Python. They were also studying and doing a boot camp. A great stepping stone to start off with, but then every time we would ask them a question, it's clear they had a Word document off to the side of the webcam and they were reading off something they'd pre-written. That was such a painstaking interview to be in. I kept sitting there thinking if he'd prepared a bit more and not read off pre-written answers, he would have been a much stronger candidate. He had the experience to back himself up. This tends to happen more often than you think, and it's a trait I've recognized among tech professionals who are incredibly technically proficient, but can't vocalize or comfortably communicate their resumes. You still need that skill of communication to stand out. You can go to ChatGPT and have perfectly crafted, personable answers to any question, but don't ever read them out directly. It's an interview, not a rereading exercise, which is why I push people to work on their communication skills if they want a high-flying career in finance or tech or data. Also, before I sign off, another tip: don't be afraid to take pauses, to think about your answers and formulate a precise and fully fledged answer to any question that's been posed to you. And that's something I do often, whether we're in meetings, whether we're in interviews, whether I'm in whatever situation I'm in. If an interviewer happens to ask me a question out of left field, I'll happily take a few seconds to think about it in complete silence and formulate a more complete and fully fledged answer than I would have given otherwise. Don't be afraid of silence. The chances of being penalized are next to none. And that's all for this video. I hope it was useful. If it was, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.